Dead America. Tales of the First Month. The Jogger by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Lexington, Kentucky. Day 0 early morning. Holden's alarm blared from his phone for several moments before he began to stir. Without lifting his head, he smacked his arm blindly against the table, eventually hitting the snooze button. Despite his desire to sleep in, he rolled over, willing his eyes to open. The morning light peeked in through the curtains, illuminating the ceiling of his apartment and giving him something to stare at as he talked to himself. "Come on, you lazy bastard," he muttered. "Get yourself going. 2 more days of pain and suffering, and you get a cheat day. Sleeping in until 7, no morning run, and Katie is going to come over and cook you a decadent meal." Holden let his mind wander to what else his girlfriend Katie might be up for on his cheat day. He lost himself in thought for a moment before shaking it off. Yeah, she may be willing to get wild, but not if you're not looking your best. So get your ass up and moving. He let out a sigh, finally convincing himself it was time to get up. Swinging his legs over the side of the bed, he reached over and turned the alarm off for the morning. "Get those push-ups going right now," he ordered himself. He let out a forceful motivational grunt before crawling down to the floor and pumping out a dozen push-ups in rapid succession. Rather than resting between sets, he kept his arms straight out, his muscular form illuminated in the morning light. 1 more set. Do it, he urged himself. With another grunt, Holden powered through another set of push-ups. As he finished the last one, he pushed himself up to his feet, dancing around from side to side to continue loosening up. Okay, let's get down to business. 5 minutes to get prepped, chug some water, and get out the door. Let's move. He moved swiftly, rushing through his morning routine before getting dressed for his run and making his way to the kitchen. While downing a bottle of water for hydration, his phone vibrated on the counter. He let out a frustrated grunt, perturbed that his morning routine was being disturbed. "Let's see who can't follow simple directions," he muttered. Holden's stern tone softened a bit when he saw the caller ID read Katie. He sighed and answered, doing his best not to sound upset. "Don't tell me you're beating me out the door this morning." Katie's voice crackled through the phone, nasally and punctuated by occasional coughing. "I'm not going to be able to make that run today, sweetie." Holden scoffed, his tone demeaning. "That sounds like some defeatist bullshit to me, Katie. Now I'm up and ready to go, so why aren't you?" "Because I'm sick, Holden," she replied. "I didn't sleep well last night, and I feel like I got hit by a car." "Well, maybe if you laid off the bottle of white wine every night, then you'd be ready for our morning runs. We're staying fit together, remember?" Katie let out a long sigh, resisting the urge to hang up on Holden. "I wasn't drinking last night, I'm legitimately sick." "Well, you know what will help clear you up? A nice run in the crisp morning air. Now I want you to pull your ass out of bed, put on your running shoes, and meet me in Elm Park in 30. "I don't know, Holden," Katie began. "I really just want to." Before she could finish, Holden snapped, his tone forceful and annoyed. "Okay, that's fine. If you want to be a lazy ass and stay in bed, that's fine. And you know what? To make sure you get enough rest, why don't we push back our dinner date? I can go out with the boys that night and you can stay in your little warm bed with your cat." Katie coughed and groaned as she pulled herself up. "Okay, I'm getting ready." Holden smirked, knowing he had Katie wrapped around his finger. "That's my girl. I'll see you in 30 by the fountain in the park." "Love you, baby," she said weakly. "Uh-huh. See you soon," Holden replied, hanging up quickly and scrolling through his phone for his music app. I swear, if she's not at the top of her game for dinner, it might be time to trade her in for a new model. He chuckled to himself as he put in his earbuds and continued to scroll. Let's see. Yeah, that'll work just fine." Holden clicked on some generic bro rock, which began blaring through his earbuds, getting him pumped up for the run. "All right, let's get after it." He slipped his phone into his pocket and stepped out of his apartment into the parking lot. Normally, by this hour, most of the cars were gone with the residents leaving for work. This morning, however, most of them were still there. "Looks like everybody's lazy today," he smirked, feeling a sense of self-satisfaction, convinced he was better than his neighbors. At least in his own mind. The music filled his ears, driving his legs as he began his morning jog. The neighborhood was a quiet one, tree-lined and filled mostly with houses. Most days he would have to keep to the sidewalk, but with virtually no traffic, he stayed on the road. Despite his best efforts to lock into his pace, his eyes wandered from one side of the street to the other. Some vehicles were missing from their driveways, but many more than usual were still parked. Is it a holiday, and nobody told me? He mused aloud. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm out here getting mine, and if those people want to waste their lives away sleeping in, they can have at it. He continued on for several blocks, noticing the same mystery of more cars parked than normal. As he crossed the half-mile mark, faint screams pierced through his music. At first, he thought it was in the song, but as the music faded, he heard it more clearly. Holden looked around for the source of the screams, which became more coherent as occasional words formed. "Help me, please." A young girl's voice cried out. Holden stopped his run, pulling out his earbuds to try and gauge the situation. It took a few more moments of screaming and pleading for him to spot the source. A couple of doors down on his right, he saw a young girl, not more than 12 or 13, standing on the front stoop of her house. She paced back and forth, crying and screaming for anyone to help her. Holden looked around, confused, but no one else seemed to be coming to her aid. "Jesus, some people these days," he muttered. "I thought neighbors were supposed to look out for one another." He kept his earbuds out as the screaming and crying continued unabated. Picking up his pace again, he jogged toward the girl's house but stayed on the road. In the back of his mind, he pleaded with the universe, "Come on, somebody's got to hear that shit. I could hear it half a block away. Isn't anybody going to man up and take care of their neighbor?" Holden tried to focus straight ahead as he continued his jog, but the girl's panicked screaming grew louder. He slowed his pace when he reached the house next to hers, looking around for any sign of help, but no one stepped outside. His attention was drawn momentarily to the house across the street when he saw the curtains in the living room move. As quickly as they fluttered, they fell still again, prompting some anger from him. "Oh, that's just great," he muttered. "You see your neighbor's teenage daughter standing in front of the house crying her eyes out, and you just look away. Nice, that's just nice." His frustration continued to build as he realized no one was going to bail him out of this situation or comfort the young girl. He let out a deep sigh, knowing the responsibility was falling to him. "Yeah, Holden, you know you're an asshole, but you're not a leaving a crying girl kind of asshole." He stopped himself, smirking and chuckling as he continued. "Well, you've left plenty of crying girls when you were done with them. But this is different. And who knows, maybe she'll have an older sister who will be thankful you looked after her." The young girl's cries intensified as she spotted him, directing her pleas toward him. "Sir, please, please help me. Something is wrong with my father." Holden sighed again, knowing it was now entirely on him to help. He walked up to the sidewalk, stopping at the top of the walkway leading to the door. Despite his willingness to help, the girl didn't move toward him, seemingly not wanting to stray too far from her door. "What's going on, little girl?" he asked. "It's my father," she replied. Something's not right with him." "Okay, what do you mean?" Holden took a step toward her, but she reflexively stepped back toward the door. He stopped, raising his hands in a friendly gesture to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. But if I'm going to help you, I'm going to have to get closer, okay?" The young girl nodded cautiously, lowering her head as if she didn't want to watch him get closer. Despite this, Holden walked slowly toward her. When he reached the halfway point of the walkway, he stopped abruptly upon getting a better look at her nightgown. It was torn in several spots, as if someone had been ripping at it. More concerning, though, was the sight of blood near her waist. A switch flipped inside Holden, shifting him from barely caring to focused rage. "Did your father hurt you, little girl?" The girl continued looking down, trembling in fear. Holden started to speak again, raising his voice but toning it down when he realized he was only frightening her more. Is he still inside?" "Yes," she whispered. "I locked him up in the bedroom, but I don't know how long that door is going to hold him." Holden sighed, composing himself as he reached into his pocket for his phone. His brain told him to call the police and let them handle it, but his inflated ego insisted he should beat the father into a pulp. The two sides battled in his mind for a moment before his ego won out, and he slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Okay, little girl, will you show me where he is? And I'll make sure he never hurts you again." Before the girl could answer, a thunderous cracking sound erupted from inside the house, confusing them both. As the girl realized what had happened, her father appeared in the doorway, rage in his eyes as he locked onto her. She screamed as he sprinted from the door, tackling her to the ground in a flash. The two of them struggled as he pulled himself on top of her, his movements erratic and frenzied, as if he were trying to bite her. It took Holden a moment to process what was happening. He broke from his frozen stance and rushed toward the confrontation, yelling out, "Get the hell off of her." Chapter 2. Holden's instincts kicked in as he sprinted toward the young girl who was fighting for her life. The creature that used to be her father thrashed about on top of her, smacking at her in an attempt to move in for the kill. Despite her small frame, she managed to deflect his attempts long enough for the jogger to reach them. Holden raced around to the back of the zombie, grabbing it by the shirt collar and yanking it as hard as he could. While it wasn't enough to lift the ghoul off the ground, he did manage to pull it backward to the ground. The ghoul slammed into the sidewalk, quickly losing interest in the girl and turning its attention to Holden, who got into a defensive position. "I don't want to hurt you, old man, but..." Holden began, his voice tense. Before Holden could finish his thought, the zombie was back on its feet, scrambling toward him. He tried to shove the ghoul off to the side, but the creature was too quick, driving its shoulder into his gut and pushing him backward. Holden stumbled for a bit before slipping on the grass, falling hard as the zombie climbed on top of him. Acting on instinct, Holden thrust his hand upward, trying to grab onto the creature's shirt. The ghoul was too quick, however, managing to grab Holden's wrist, pulling it right up to his mouth. The jogger let out a horrific pain scream as the creature's teeth clamped down on his forearm. Holden yanked his arm free, leaving a chunk of flesh behind. He remained petrified with fear for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation even as it was happening right in front of him. Finally, he snapped out of it, shoving the zombie back and scrambling back to his feet. The sudden movement agitated the zombie, who dropped the fresh meat in his mouth and began another assault on the jogger. The creature let out an excited moan as it rushed toward the still fresh prey in front of him. Holden had more time to react, managing to step to the side and shove the rushing ghoul into the bushes in front of the house. He looked down at his arm, seeing the extent of the damage before snapping back to the moment. The creature thrashed about for a moment before managing to pick itself up out of the bushes and turning once more toward the jogger. "Jesus, don't you ever quit," Holden muttered, his frustration evident. The zombie pushed off from the edge of the house, picking up speed quickly. Rather than go on the defensive, Holden rushed forward, lowering his shoulder and planting it into the gut of the ghoul. He strained as he lifted the larger man off the ground, flinging him into the side of the house. "You better stay down," Holden warned, his voice rough. The zombie didn't listen, as it struggled to get up from its position in the bushes. Realizing that his attacker wasn't going to stop, Holden looked around for something to help put the ghoul down for good. "That'll work," he murmured, spotting a heavy garden gnome. Holden reached down at the edge of the bushes, grabbing the gnome and getting it ready for the creature. "I swear to Christ, if you take another step toward me, I'm going to bash your fucking brains in," he shouted. The zombie seemed unimpressed by the threat, locking eyes on the jogger and moaning with pleasure as it began its assault. Holden didn't hesitate in attacking back, swinging the heavy gnome as hard as he could. The yard ornament cracked along with the zombie's skull as the two met. The ghoul fell to the ground, convulsing as blood poured out from the side of its head. Holden stood over it, makeshift weapon held high above his head, ready to strike again if necessary. Much to his relief, the ghoul stayed down, fidgeting about for a moment before finally falling silent. Once the threat was neutralized, Holden let out a relieved sigh before dropping the weapon to the ground. "Yeah, that serves you right, asshole," he muttered, giving the fallen creature a kick to the side. A whimper came from near the front door, and Holden looked up to see the distraught young girl in a near comatose state, her eyes threatening to start a stream of tears, but none came due to her shock. "Damn it," Holden cursed softly. He looked around at the other houses, not seeing anyone coming outside to help or investigate. He glanced back over to the girl, contemplating just taking off. However, as he glanced down at his arm, he knew he needed to stop the bleeding first. "I guess we're going inside for a minute," he decided. Holden gave the neighborhood one more look before walking over to the young girl, who was shaking and staring at what used to be her father. It took him a moment to figure out what she was looking at, moving in between to block her view once he did. "Don't look at him. Don't look at him," he said gently. "I want you to just focus on me." The young girl was catatonic, staring straight ahead even after he stepped into her view. Holden grabbed her shoulders and gave her a gentle shake, trying to snap her back to the moment, but it didn't work. "Okay, come on, girl. Let's get you back inside," he urged. Holden tried to gently guide her through the door, but she didn't want to move. With his frustration beginning to bubble up, he pushed with a little more force, getting her to move. "There we go, come on," he encouraged. Holden led the girl into the living room, having to physically walk her over to the couch and sit her down. He got down to one knee so that he could look her in the eye. "Is there anybody else in the house?" he asked. The girl could only manage to stare straight ahead without responding. Holden snapped his fingers in front of her face several times, hoping to break her out of her trance, but it didn't work. "Girl, I need you to talk to me. Is there anybody else in the house?" he asked again, his patience wearing thin. Several more silent moments went by before Holden let out a frustrated grunt. "Jesus Christ, you're no help," he muttered. He looked around the living room for something that could be used as a weapon, eventually settling on a fire poker sitting beside the fireplace. He gave it a couple of practice swings before turning towards the rest of the house, calling out as he walked down the lone hallway toward the bedrooms. "If there's anybody else in here, I'm friendly as long as you are. Just call out to me, because your daughter or sister or whatever needs your help," he announced. Holden walked slowly down the hallway, poking his head into each of the 3 bedrooms at the end of the hall. Once he saw they were empty, he dropped his guard, letting out a sigh of relief before flinching at the pain in his arm. He walked back up the hallway, stepping into the bathroom to get a good look at his injury. A large chunk of flesh was missing from his arm. "Damn it, I'm going to crack that asshole's skull again when I'm leaving," he grumbled. Holden looked through the medicine cabinet, spotting some antibacterial spray. He hesitated for a moment before spraying it on, preparing himself for the pain that was to follow. "Oh, just man up, you pansy," he muttered to himself. Holden let out a grunt as he sprayed it onto his wound. A white-hot stream of pain coursed through his arm, causing him to yell out. After an impressive string of curses, he got himself under control. "Come on, bandages? I need some bandages," he muttered, rummaging through the bathroom. He found nothing but small band-aids, nothing large enough to cover his wound. Finally, he spotted a white towel that was folded up and laying on a small shelf. "I saved the kid, so they owe me," he reasoned. Holden grabbed the towel and put it onto his wound, applying pressure as he walked back into the front of the house, where the girl was still sitting motionless on the couch. "Hey, do you have some tape or?" he began, but then trailed off when he realized that she wasn't going to respond. "Never mind, I'll check the kitchen." Holden stepped into the next room, rummaging through drawers before finding a roll of duct tape. "Bingo," he said, relieved. It took him a moment to tape the towel to his arm. Once secure and the pain began to mellow out, his mind began racing. "Okay, now what in the hell do you do?" he asked himself aloud. A stream of nothingness ran through his mind, the panic of the moment settling in. Finally, thoughts of his girl Katie popped into his head. "Katie," he exclaimed. He hastily pulled out his cell phone and hit her contact. The phone began ringing a moment later and continued to ring several times before going to voicemail. Damn it. She must have already left for her run. Damn girl just hates having that ringer on, he muttered. Holden's mind continued to race, attempting to figure out the next move. After several moments, he let out a sigh, shaking his head at the most logical thing to do in this situation. The police, dumbass. Call the police, he decided. Holden dialed 911 on his phone, however. Instead of ringing, a series of tones played over the line. "What the hell?" he muttered. He tried them again from his cell phone, getting the same response. "My tax dollars hard at work there," he grumbled. His complaining was interrupted as he heard a scream coming from across the street. Holden rushed back into the front room, looking out the window, and spotted an older woman running from her front door. A moment later, two creatures emerged from the house, tackling her from behind, both of them ripping into her with their teeth as she screamed. "What in the holy hell is going on?" Holden muttered, eyes wide with disbelief. "I've got to get out of here." He turned his attention to the driveway, where there was no car. Glancing over at the catatonic girl, he spoke to her even though he knew she wouldn't respond. "Really, girl? Your family doesn't have a car?" he asked, exasperated. To his surprise, the young girl spoke in response, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother took it to work." Holden bit back a curse, not wanting to upset her further. After a brief moment to compose himself, he focused on his next steps. "The park is only a half-mile away on the other side of the shops," he muttered, thinking aloud. "You can make it. You can grab Katie and get back to her house. Or you can run back to your apartment and get your car, dumbass." Holden shook his head at that last idea, knowing it would leave Katie exposed for longer. Despite the way he often treated her, he did care about her in his own way. "What the hell? Let's make a run for it," he decided. Holden got up and headed toward the door, but paused when he noticed a cordless landline on the table. He grabbed the phone, walking back over and placing it into the girl's hand. "Okay, girl, I want you to listen to me," he said firmly. "You keep this door locked and don't open it for anybody but the police. Do you understand?" He shook the girl slightly, trying to get her attention. "I'm serious. It's dangerous outside. Do you understand?" Finally, the girl nodded slightly, holding up the phone. "Yes, and I'll keep calling them until they answer," she replied softly. "Okay, you do that?" Holden nodded. He walked back over to the door, but before he could open it, the girl spoke again. "Thank you," she said, her voice so faint it was almost lost in the chaos around them. Holden paused for a moment, looking back at the girl. "You're welcome, girl. Now you be safe," he replied. He turned the knob and rushed out the door, slamming it shut behind him. Chapter 3. Holden kept his eye on the two zombies across the street, feasting on an older woman in the front yard as he ran. He moved swiftly, his feet pounding against the pavement, and immediately regretted the noise his shoes made. While it wasn't a tremendous amount of sound, it was enough to draw the attention of the two creatures a couple of doors down. Holden glanced over his shoulder, watching in horror as one of the ghouls broke away from its old lady buffet and began pursuing him. "Damn it," Holden muttered, picking up the pace and sprinting down the street, desperate to put some distance between himself and the approaching zombie. Despite his best efforts, by the end of the next block, his pursuer had gained on him, realizing the creature wasn't slowing down. Holden knew he had to act or be caught soon. He scanned the next street, hoping to spot someone who could help him, but there was no other living soul, just a fenced-in yard on the corner. He adjusted his course toward it, thinking to himself, "You may be able to run, but let's see if you're as athletic as I am." Holden picked up as much speed as he could, leaping just before reaching the chest-high chain-link fence. With a simple hand press on the crossbar at the top, he propelled himself over it with ease. He let his momentum carry him halfway through the yard before looking back to the fence, watching as the pursuing zombie slammed into it at full speed, making no attempt to jump or climb over it. Holden slowed down when he realized the creature lacked the ability or intelligence to get over. He stopped just before reaching the other side of the yard, staring back in disbelief. "What in the hell?" he muttered. "Are you seriously trying to run through the fence instead of going over it?" He continued to stare at the ghoul for several moments, bewildered by the scene. His thoughts were interrupted when something slammed against the glass patio door of the house. Holden's first instinct was to run, but he steadied himself when he realized that the creature inside was more interested in slamming its hands against the glass than opening the door. Despite his mind telling him to flee, Holden walked toward the door to get a better look at the thrashing zombie. It was a middle-aged man, dressed in a bloodied business suit, as if on his way to his office job. His eyes were vacant, filled with nothing but hunger. "What in the hell happened to you?" Holden asked, jumping back when another creature slammed against the door from nowhere. It took him a moment to register the new figure, a middle-aged woman in a bloody nightgown, her mouth stained with blood as she gnashed her teeth against the glass. "You must be the Mrs. Holden," quipped, giving them both a once-over, quickly piecing together that she had attacked her husband. The wound on the man's neck seemed to have bled out rapidly. "That sucks for you, my dude. That's why I'm against marriage. They can be a real-life sucker." He chuckled to himself, amused by his own wit, until a sharp pain shot through his arm. A grim realization washed over him as he looked down at his injury and noticed its similarity to the one on the businessman's neck. No, oh hell no. I'm not going to become one of those things, am I?" he muttered to himself, panic rising. "No, that guy died. I'm going to be fine. This is just a flesh wound," Holden continued muttering, trying to reassure himself that he would be okay. He wasn't entirely successful, but he managed to convince himself enough to keep moving. It's okay. You're going to get to Katie. You're going to get into her car and drive off to the hospital." But his mind darted back to the 911 call, not answering, and the eerie lack of sirens in the air, despite everything that was happening. "Okay, maybe a hospital in Frankfurt. But still, you're going to be okay, but you gotta keep moving." He pulled himself away from the door, forcing himself to ignore the lingering thought about his injury. When he reached the other side of the fence, he looked both ways before jumping over, ensuring the coast was clear. He rushed up the next yard, pausing briefly at the gap between two houses and peeking out toward the street. A moment later, a car sped past, its tires screeching as it turned abruptly. Though the vehicle disappeared from sight, Holden heard the unmistakable sound of it losing control. He winced as metal crumpled around what he assumed was a light pole or tree. For a brief moment, he thought about moving toward the street to see if he could help the driver. But he quickly dismissed the idea when he saw two more creatures rushing toward the wreck at an alarming speed. "Jesus, how many of these things are out here?" he muttered, hands banging against metal resonating through the air. He turned and continued running toward the park. Given the disturbances on the street, Holden decided it was safer to stick to the yards. He managed to reach the next side street without trouble, but his luck ran out there. At the end of the neighborhood, directly across from him, were the parking lots of several businesses. Whatever was happening in the residential area paled in comparison to the chaos in the business district. He watched in horror as patrons at a coffee shop engaged in what, to the untrained eye, might look like a riot. Bodies were running, getting knocked down, and thrown over tables. One man wielded a chair like a circus lion tamer, swinging it and smacking a couple of attacking ghouls. The valiant defense didn't last long, though, as three more zombies rushed him. Holden watched silently as the man was pinned against the glass, punching one creature in the head as two others bit into him. Blood spurted onto the window, obscuring the view as another creature joined the fray. "It's only a few more blocks to the park. Now get out there and run your ass off," Holden urged himself, willing his body back into motion. He sprinted across the street, backtracking toward the road that cut through the district. As he turned the corner, he was met with more chaos. A couple of creatures were on their knees, slapping their hands against the window of an overturned car. Holden made eye contact with the driver, who silently pleaded for help. But the only thing Holden could do was shrug his shoulders and keep running. He didn't look down the next street as he ran across it, but in his peripheral vision, he could see madness people in the streets, running for their lives, cars speeding away. Rather than dwell on it, he picked up the pace, getting off the road just as a car sped by, nearly clipping his heel. "Asshole," Holden yelled, still running, trying to put some distance between himself and the carnage. His plan lasted only 6 steps before two figures crashed through a door just a few yards ahead. One of the creatures was driven back by a larger store clerk, both of them hurtling toward the road. As the ghoul stepped off the sidewalk, it lost its balance and fell back into the street, the clerk's full weight slamming down on top of it. The force and momentum resulted in a sickening crunch as the creature's skull shattered on impact with the pavement. The clerk cried out, clearly injured from the fall but not severely. Holden stopped dead in his tracks as he approached, wanting to make sure no one else followed them out of the building. He was thankful he did, because, seconds later, 2 more creatures emerged from the store. Without hesitation, they pounced on the unsuspecting clerk. Both zombies grabbed onto him, going in for the kill. one of the ghouls managed to sink its teeth into the man's shoulder, eliciting a pained cry. The clerk fought back fiercely, spinning his body around to free himself from their grasp. The biting creature lost its grip first, tumbling back into the other lane of traffic, where it met the business end of a speeding car. The body flew through the air for several yards before slamming onto the pavement. Before it could get up, the panicked driver rolled over both its legs and continued driving as if nothing had happened. Despite his best efforts, the clerk couldn't free himself from the clutches of the remaining creature, which held on with an ever-tightening grip. The clerk winced as its fingernails dug into his skin, drawing blood. Holden remained motionless, watching the fight unfold. As the clerk began to gain the upper hand, grabbing the ghoul by the throat and forcing it back, he made eye contact with Holden. "Jesus Christ, man. Are you just going to stand there and watch me get my ass kicked? Help me," the clerk shouted. Holden snapped out of his stupor and took a step forward but stopped again as another creature sprinted out from inside the store. The zombie's focus was entirely on the clerk, and Holden didn't want to do anything to change its mind. The clerk's eyes widened as he saw the other creature sprinting toward him. He let out a string of curses as it collided with him, the combined weight of the two zombies knocking him off balance and to the ground. It only took the creatures a few seconds to gain the upper hand, biting into the man as he continued to struggle. Seeing his opportunity, Holden took off running again, darting past the open door and down the street half a block. Though he couldn't hear what the clerk yelled after him, he knew it wasn't meant kindly. But that didn't matter to Holden. All he cared about was getting to the park, where Katie would be waiting for him. At least he hoped that would be the case. Before Holden reached the next intersection, a troubling sound rose from behind him, forcing him to glance back. A door further down the block swung open, slamming hard against the wall as several creatures poured out of the building. Most of the ghouls turned toward the downed clerk, who was still putting up a fierce fight. However, two of the newcomers spotted Holden and immediately gave chase. Oh my God. Chapter 4. Holden's mind had gone blank, consumed by a single, desperate focus, putting one foot in front of the other as fast as humanly possible. Even over his ragged breathing and the relentless pounding of his footsteps on the pavement, he could hear the creatures in pursuit. And they were gaining. He sprinted down the next block, searching frantically for another fence to leap over, but there were none in sight. The block was mostly empty lots, the homes that once stood there recently torn down by a developer, leaving no place to hide. His muscles burned as he forced himself onward, daring to glance over his shoulder when he reached the halfway mark. The creatures were only 5 yards away and closing fast. His mind raced even faster. So this is how it ends, he thought to himself, because you didn't have enough cardio days in. The footsteps behind him grew louder. 3 yards, 2 yards. You don't have to go down without a fight, though, he continued to think. When you get to the next block, you make a stand. He tried to psych himself up for the looming fight, even though he knew it was a losing proposition. He had seen what those things could do, the wound on his arm a stark reminder of their ferocity. Holden saw the next street approaching and pressed forward, determined to reach the middle before confronting his would-be killers. As he reached it, he made a sudden, deft move, planting his foot and pivoting around as hard as he could. He managed to place his hands on the shoulder of the lead creature, shoving it aside and letting its momentum carry it past him. The other, however, had him dead to rights, charging straight at him. His instincts kicked in, and he ducked down just as the creature lunged. By getting low, he avoided being grabbed, but he took a forceful knee to the jaw, knocking him to the ground. Dazed, Holden struggled to regain his bearings. The sound of gunshots nearby snapped him back to reality. He looked up at the attacking creatures and watched in genuine shock as the backs of their heads exploded. They crumpled to the ground in a heap, their moans replaced by the screeching of tires stopping just a few yards away. The engine of a heavy-duty pickup truck rumbled close by. 3 men in the back wielded shotguns and hunting rifles, all 3 barrels aimed directly at him. "Don't shoot," Holden shouted, his voice trembling. "I'm alive. I'm not one of those things. Don't shoot." The 3 men continued to stare him down, not adjusting their aim. To be safe, Holden kept his injured arm turned away from them, hoping they wouldn't notice. After several tense moments of silence, one of the gunmen spoke up. "It's not safe out here," the gunman warned. "You may want to get inside." "Yes, sir," Holden replied quickly. "I was just out for a jog when all this started up. I'm heading home right now." "You better be, if you know what's good for you," the gunman said, smacking the top of the truck a couple of times to get the driver's attention. "Let's head down towards the coffee shop. There's probably a mess of those things down there." The man didn't even look in Holden's direction as the truck sped off. Holden picked himself up off the ground, dumbfounded by his luck, as he stared at the two zombies lying at his feet. "God, I love living in Kentucky," he muttered under his breath. He glanced around for more threats, relieved to see nothing in the immediate area, and continued his run. The park was still a few blocks away, but from what he could see, it was a clear path. He flinched as gunshots erupted several blocks behind him. The handful of shots quickly escalated into a chaotic barrage, sounding like the men in the pickup truck were firing as fast as they could. "While I appreciate the assist," Holden thought, "it sounds like you boys bit off more than you could chew." He continued listening as he ran, the gunfire falling silent a few moments later. He pushed the thought aside and kept running toward the park, now just a block away. Before entering, he stopped beside a parked car, using it as cover while he surveyed the area. Faint screams from the park reached his ears, and he lowered his head. "Well, it looks like this is happening everywhere in town," he muttered. He remained hidden as the screams continued, pulling out his cell phone and trying to call Katie again. While it rang, he repeated the same phrase over and over to himself. "Please pick up." The ringing continued, unbroken, until it went to voicemail. Instead of hanging up, Holden listened to Katie's perky voice as she instructed him to leave a message. He didn't know why, but when the beep sounded, he started speaking. "Katie, I hope you're okay and that you didn't listen to me this morning. I know I can be an asshole sometimes. Hell, most of the time," he began. "But I honestly hope you're sound asleep in your bed and not out in this mess." Before he could continue, the message service beeped and cut him off. "Damn it," he swore under his breath. He looked back toward the park, feeling a small sense of relief that the screaming had stopped, but dread soon filled him as he realized what that likely meant. "Christ," he muttered, "whoever was screaming probably isn't here anymore." He forced himself forward toward the park, even though every instinct screamed not to. "You've come this far," he told himself. "Move your ass and go get your girl. She's smart and tough, so if she's there, she's still standing." Holden picked up the pace, crossing the street to the park's edge, which was shielded by a long line of trees. He maneuvered through them, emerging on the other side before immediately ducking back behind cover. The business district had looked bad, but the park was a war zone. Some unfortunate company had been hosting a breakfast event to advertise, and potential customers weren't the only guests. Tables were overturned, displays knocked to the ground, and bodies littered the area a couple of 100 yards away. Even more concerning were the couple of dozen creatures milling about, waiting for someone to target. "Come on, where are you, Katie?" he whispered, scanning the park. His eyes landed on the fountain, where they were supposed to meet, positioned between him and the ill-fated event. There was no movement near the fountain. Most of the creatures had gravitated toward the event area. Then he spotted her. Katie, in her bright purple running shorts and top, emerged from behind the fountain. "Jesus, girl, hide," Holden muttered, panic rising in his chest. Instinct kicked in. He burst from his hiding place, sprinting toward her as fast as he could. Even though she was 100 yards away, he recognized her instantly. As he ran, his gaze locked onto her, seeing only her back. It looked as if she was trying to hide behind the fountain while keeping an eye on the undead by the event. Holden closed the distance to 40 yards when she turned around, drawn by the noise he was making. He let out a gasp, slamming to a stop as he saw the front of her running shirt covered in blood. "What the hell?" he whispered in horror. Katie, now zombified, locked eyes with him, letting out a scream from her blood-soaked mouth before charging toward him. Holden slipped on the grass as he tried to stop, dropping to the ground. A fraction of a second later, he scrambled back to his feet and ran hard the way he had come. He knew she was hot on his heels, closing fast, but he didn't dare glance back. He focused on the empty space ahead and the tree line that was getting closer with every step. Holden darted through the trees, racing toward the street. At that moment, he gave in to temptation and glanced back. Katie was still 15 yards away, the spark he had always loved in her eyes replaced with emptiness. The blood around her mouth, staining her running shirt, held his attention as he reached the street. Then came the pain. Sharp and sudden in his thigh as it snapped in two. His feet left the pavement, flipping over his head as the bumper of a car plowed into him. The pain was bad, but the confusion was worse as the world spun around uncontrollably. While it was over in a split second, it felt like an eternity of flying through the air. He heard an engine rev and tires screech on the pavement, followed by a sharp crack. His collarbone, along with several other bones in his arms and neck, snapped upon impact with the road. The pain was too intense for his body to process, the shock too great for him to handle. Blood filled his windpipe as he gasped for air, struggling to move even an inch, but unable to do so. The car that had hit him vanished around the corner without even slowing down. Holden wasn't alone for long, though, as Katie soon emerged from the tree line at the park's edge. He tried to speak, wanting to plead for his life, but the only sound he could make was a gurgle as blood filled his throat, preventing any words from forming. With one last desperate gurgle, he watched helplessly as Katie rushed toward him, an excited moan on her lips, and an insatiable hunger that she was about to quench. The end.